Hello, I'm John Deere, and welcome back again to Living Nonviolence. This is the fourth of our 6 videos for our 6-week class together. And this week I want to continue to reflect with you on that second attribute of nonviolence, practicing nonviolence toward all others, all creatures, and all creation. So I'd like to say a little bit today about widening our hearts into universal nonviolence and living in solidarity with everyone, as well as being nonviolent to the creatures and to the earth itself, and doing our part to stop environmental destruction. So we want to be nonviolent to everyone on the planet for the rest of our lives, like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and all the saints. I think that means we have to move into what I call universal nonviolence, to become like Gandhi and Dr. King, universal people who live consciously aware of our oneness with every human being on earth. To try to live in, if you will, loving solidarity with all people as our sisters and brothers. And so to practice universal love, universal compassion, universal peace, and to make that our practice and our intention and our life journey. And even to widen our hearts to include all the creatures on the earth and all creation. Isn't that wonderful? That, for me, is the spiritual life, the spiritual journey. Well, in the last session we talked about interpersonal nonviolence, and I can hear people saying, well, I'm nonviolent to others. That's not my issue. I'd say we can all go deeper. You can always go deeper into nonviolence. So let me ask some questions. How are you part of institutionalized, structured, systemic racism? How are you prejudiced against people of different color? We always want to reach out, love everyone, and break down any barriers and walls. And that means resisting racism and speaking against racism and working to abolish racist structures, systems, and institutions. If you're a male, how are you sexist and part of the sexist culture? We men want to be really nonviolent to women, and we want to work for, all of us work for equality and for an end to the structures and systems of sexism. And we can go through the whole list. How are you nonviolent to children, toward those of different religions, those of different nations, those of different ages, anyone who's different? How does your nonviolence affect very poor people, say the homeless, or the hungry, or people in prison, or the refugees and the immigrants? If you're privileged, I think nonviolence calls us to downward economic mobility, to share our resources with the poor, and to work to abolish poverty, to practice, if you will, a preferential love for the poor and the disenfranchised and the enemy, toward all those who are hurt by the culture of violence. That's why I keep saying this can go deeper and deeper and deeper, and it leads to the big realities of total violence. How are you complicit with a culture of war, with systemic global violence and nuclear weapons? How do you support war and weapons? And how can you non-cooperate more and more with the culture, the global culture of permanent war and weapons? Well, that means we'd have to get rid of our guns, renounce our support for our military or any military and all warfare, discourage young people from joining any military, speak out against weapons and war, and always work to promote nonviolent conflict resolution, as Gandhi taught. I'm filming this here in the shadow of Los Alamos, New Mexico, which was the birthplace of the atomic bomb, where they continue to build all the U.S. nuclear weapons. I think if you don't speak out against that, then you're for it. Your silence is complicity with a culture of war. We want to be people of universal nonviolence, so we have to take a stand against social violence, systemic violence, global institutionalized violence in all its forms, and break through the complicity of silence and not be afraid to speak out. In other words, as people of universal nonviolence, we all have to take a stand against universal violence, if you will. But there's more. We want to practice nonviolence toward all creatures and creation itself. I invite you to reflect on your relationship with the creatures of the earth and the earth itself, and how they interact and affect your nonviolence. I think we want to stop killing the creatures and stop the extinction of so many species. And as the United Nations says, if you want to care for the earth and to be a peacemaker, you have to become a vegetarian, ideally a vegan. A vegetarian diet is not only healthier, it not only stops the killing of the creatures, it actually stops the meat industry, which means there's more grain for poor people locally in the third world, and so it can stop hunger. And there's less methane put into the air, which helps stop climate change. That's worth going to study and reflect on. In this time of catastrophic climate change, we all have to make changes so that we're more nonviolent to the earth. We can live more simply, use alternative sources of energy like wind and solar power, but change what we eat, what we wear, how we travel, what we buy, and where we live. From now on, for example, we don't want to use plastic. We always try to recycle, try to install solar panels, and resist the destruction of the earth in whatever way we can, from fracking to the use of oil and coal to war and nuclear weapons. Jesus said this long ago, as I write in my new book, The Beatitudes of Peace. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are the meek, they shall inherit the earth." It's so amazing to me because meekness is the biblical word for nonviolence, and Jesus connects the life of nonviolence with our oneness with creation, right there, 2,000 years ago. If you practice biblical meekness, creative nonviolence, you'll become one with the earth, with creation. If you're violent, you won't be connected to the earth. So here we are, centuries of violence later, on the brink of destroying the planet. You and I want to make these connections and live the connections between nonviolence and the earth itself. This is a great, beautiful journey. So 3 questions for you. How can we widen our hearts into universal nonviolence toward every human being on the planet? And here we're talking about breaking through social violence, the barriers of racism and sexism and war and nuclear weapons, and proactively showing love to the poor, the disenfranchised, and those who are targeted for death. Second, what concrete steps can we take to be more nonviolent to the creatures of the earth? And third, what concrete steps can we take to be more nonviolent to the earth itself, to stop the destruction of the environment, and to show more respect and reverence for creation and for the creatures? So thank you very much. Send some comments and questions in. Maybe by the end of the week, send a reflection or a journal entry on the class discussion board. God bless you and peace be with you.